Madison didn't even flinch. That was the part Claire Whitmore could never explain to anyone afterward. Not the betrayal itself, not finding her sister in Evan's bed, not the way Evan scrambled for the sheets like a teenager caught cheating on a test. It was Madison's face. Perfectly calm, almost bored. Like Claire had walked in on something that was always meant to happen, and Claire was simply the last person in Chicago to know. You were never going to fit into his world anyway, Madison said. Her voice was flat, certain, surgical. You know that. You've always known that. Claire stood in the doorway of Evan Blackwood's penthouse bedroom and felt something inside her go very, very quiet. If you've ever been betrayed by the two people you trusted most in the world, on the same night, in the same room, drop your city in the comments below. Let me know where you're watching from. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because this story is only getting started, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Hit that like button and stay with me, because the woman they threw away, she's about to become the most dangerous person in the room. The night it happened, Claire had been trying to reach Evan for 4 days. 4 days of calls that went to voicemail. 4 days of texts delivered but never answered. 4 days of that particular corrosive silence that sits in your chest like something swallowed wrong. You keep waiting for it to pass, and it never quite does. She told herself there was a reasonable explanation. Evan's family had dealings she didn't fully understand, complications she'd learned not to ask about too directly. The Blackwood name carried weight in Chicago that most people felt in their bones before they ever heard it spoken. She'd accepted that there were parts of his life that existed outside the edges of what he showed her. But 4 days of nothing was different. 4 days felt like a message. She drove to his building at 9:15 on a Tuesday evening in November, when the wind off Lake Michigan had turned mean and the streets were mostly empty. She still had the key card to his elevator. He'd given it to her 8 months ago, back when the engagement still felt like something real and not like a thing she was slowly outgrowing without quite admitting it. She told herself she was overreacting. She told herself there was probably a simple explanation. She rode the elevator to the 43rd floor and let herself into the penthouse and stood in his entryway for a moment, listening to the particular silence of a space that isn't empty. Lights were on somewhere down the hall. She almost called out his name. Something stopped her, not intuition exactly, more like the body knowing something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. She walked down the corridor toward the bedroom, and the door was open about 6 inches, and through the gap she could see the lamp on his nightstand throwing orange light across the ceiling, and she could hear breathing that was not one person sleeping. She pushed the door open. Evan Blackwood was 29 years old, 6 feet tall, conventionally handsome in the way of men who have never had to work very hard for anything. He had charmed Claire 3 years ago at a fundraiser for the nonprofit where she worked, shown up with a large check and an easy smile, and somehow found every conversation they had afterward more important than the last. She had known who his family was. She hadn't been naive about it, but she'd believed him when he told her he was trying to build something different from the empire his uncle controlled. She'd believed there was something real underneath the Blackwood name. She had agreed to marry him because she thought she understood what she was choosing. He saw her first. His face did several things in very quick succession. Shock, then guilt, then something that looked horribly like calculation. And he reached for the sheet and sat up and said her name the way people say the name of something they've knocked off a shelf and are watching fall. Claire! She already knew. She didn't need him to finish the sentence. She didn't need to look at the other person in the bed. She already knew who it was from the shape of the shoulder, from the particular way the dark hair was spread across the pillow. Madison had always slept like that, dramatic, even unconscious, even from childhood. Claire had watched her sleep more times than she could count, had sat beside her through fevers and nightmares, and every hard thing that came after their mother died when Madison was 15 and Claire was 22 and suddenly responsible for a grieving teenager who didn't want to be saved. Madison sat up slowly. She didn't reach for the sheet the way Evan had. She didn't look panicked or ashamed. She looked at Claire with those precise dark eyes that had always been sharper than her age suggested, and her expression was something Claire couldn't immediately name. Not guilt, not even defiance exactly, more like relief, like she'd been holding something heavy for a long time and had finally decided to put it down. "How long?" Claire said. It came out completely level. She had not planned that. It just came out that way. Evan started to speak. Madison cut him off. 8 months, Madison said. give or take. 8 months. 8 months ago, Claire had been helping Madison move into a new apartment. Had spent an entire weekend painting her kitchen. The particular shade of green Madison had changed her mind about 4 times. Had bought her a coffee maker and a set of towels and driven back across town at 10 at night because Madison had locked herself out. 8 months ago, Claire had still been telling herself that her little sister was finally becoming someone she could rely on. "I need you to leave," Evan said. His voice had found something, not quite steadiness, but the approximation of it. He'd pulled the sheet around himself and was sitting on the edge of the bed with his jaw set. And Claire had a sudden vivid memory of the first time she'd realized that his charm was something he turned on and off, not something that lived in him permanently. "You need me to leave," she said. "Claire, I'm sorry. I know how this looks. You don't need to explain how it looks." She pulled the engagement ring off her finger. It was a significant ring, nearly 3 carats, emerald cut, chosen from a velvet tray in a jeweler's on Michigan Avenue with a man standing nearby whose job it was to make the whole experience feel historic. She set it on the nightstand beside the lamp. She did it carefully, not violently, not with any particular drama. Just set it down. Madison watched her do it and said, "You were never right for his world, Claire." The words landed differently than Madison probably intended them to. Not like a knife. More like a confirmation of something Claire had been arguing against for 2 years without quite admitting what she was arguing against. "You were always too careful," Madison continued. Her voice had taken on a quality Claire recognized. The particular tone she used when she'd thought something through and decided she was right and was now explaining it to someone slower than herself. Too satisfied with small things. You think his life is something you can manage like one of your case files, but it's not. You don't understand what it takes to— Madison. To actually survive in a family like— Madison. Her sister stopped. "Don't," Claire said. Just the one word. Flat and final. She turned and walked out of the bedroom. She walked down the corridor. She walked through the penthouse and pressed the elevator button and stood waiting for it with her hands loose at her sides and her breathing even, because the one thing she was absolutely not going to do was let either of them hear her fall apart in the hallway. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. She made it 6 floors down before she pressed the stop button and stood alone in the stopped elevator for 30 seconds with her fist pressed against her mouth and her eyes closed. Just 30 seconds. Not crying exactly. Something that might have become crying if she'd let it, but she didn't. She took 3 slow breaths. She pressed the button again. The elevator resumed its descent. She came out into the lobby and walked toward the street and almost didn't see him. He was standing near the building's side entrance, in the darker section of the lobby where the light from the security desk didn't quite reach. A man in his 50s, she would have guessed, well over 6 feet, in a dark suit that fit him the way expensive suits fit men who've worn them long enough that they stop noticing the weight. He had gray threading through his dark hair and a face that was difficult to read, not because it was blank, but because the thing behind it was very controlled. He was watching her with an attention that was not casual. She recognized him. Not personally. From photographs. From the particular way that people she'd met through Evan went careful and quiet when certain names came up in conversation. From the things that were never quite said. Vincent Blackwood. Evan's uncle. The man who actually controlled the Blackwood organization. The man who had built it over 30 years into something that politicians deferred to and rivals quietly avoided and law enforcement circled at a careful distance without ever quite getting close enough to touch. He didn't pretend he hadn't been watching her. "You handled that with more composure than most people could manage," he said. His voice was low and even. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. Claire looked at him for a moment. Her chest still felt like something had been removed from it, and the space hadn't closed yet. "How much did you see?" she asked. "Enough." He paused. "I came to speak with Evan. The front desk told me he'd gone up. I was waiting." He said it simply, without apology or elaboration. "Well," Claire said, "he's up there. He's occupied." "I know what he's occupied with." Something moved across Vincent's face. Not surprise, not quite disgust. Something more complicated than either. "Madison Whitmore has been a problem for longer than my nephew understands." That caught her. She was almost to the door. She stopped. "What does that mean?" Vincent looked at her with that measuring attention for a moment, And then he said, "It means your sister has been passing information about Evan's operations to the Hawthorne family for the past 6 months. It means what you walked in on tonight is considerably less important than what it appears to be." The lobby was quiet around them. Outside, the November wind pressed against the glass. Claire absorbed this. She was good at absorbing information that rearranged things. It was most of what her job consisted of. The ability to take in a fact that changed the shape of a situation and not immediately fragment was something she'd developed over years of work with women in crisis. You heard what you heard, you let it settle. Then you assessed. "She's working with the Hawthorns," Claire said. "She is, or was, more accurately. The arrangement appears to be fraying at the edges." He paused. "Your sister is not as sophisticated as she believes herself to be. She thought she could manage both sides of a situation that has no middle ground." "Evan knows?" "Evan does not know." The flatness in his voice when he said this communicated several things about his opinion of his nephew without stating any of them directly. Claire looked at the door, then back at Vincent Blackwood. "Why are you telling me this?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thoughtful, like he was deciding how precisely to say something he'd already decided to say. "Because I watched you walk out of that elevator and I expected to see a woman who was breaking," he said. "Instead, I saw something considerably more useful than that." He paused. "And because I have a proposal that may interest you, given the circumstances." A proposal. A business arrangement to begin with, though the word itself is somewhat inadequate for what I have in mind. Claire looked at him with the same level of attention she used when a client told her something that didn't quite make sense yet. "You should say exactly what you mean," she said. "I'm not in the mood for oblique." The smallest suggestion of something appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly, the precursor of one. "I'm proposing marriage," he said. "You would become my wife. Formally, publicly, and in the full view of everyone in this city who knows what the Blackwood name means." He let that sit for a second. "Evan spent 2 years with you on his arm. He threw you away for a woman who has been betraying him to his enemies. What happens to a man standing when the woman he discarded is suddenly sitting beside the man whose approval he has chased his entire life?" Claire was very still. "You'd be doing this to humiliate him," she said. "I would be doing this for several reasons simultaneously," Vincent said. "Humiliating Evan is among the least important of them, but I won't pretend it doesn't factor in." He held her gaze. "You would benefit as well. Protection, resources, legal standing within an organization that will ensure no one touches you, and the particular satisfaction of becoming, in one move, the most powerful woman in the family that just discarded you." The lobby hummed with the distant sound of the building's ventilation. Claire looked at the ring she no longer had on her finger, at the pale line where it had sat for 2 years. "I have 24 hours to consider this," she said. It was not quite a question. "You have 24 hours," Vincent confirmed. "If you walk out that door and never contact me, I will understand, and I will not pursue it. If you decide you want to make everyone who underestimated you regret it." He reached into his jacket and produced a card, plain and white, with nothing on it but a number in small black type. He set it on the ledge beside her. "Then call." He turned and walked toward the elevator. Claire stood in the lobby of Evan Blackwood's building with the card on the ledge beside her and the wind making sounds against the glass, and the knowledge that the life she had been building for 2 years had just collapsed entirely. She reached out and picked up the card. She told herself she was just keeping it, that picking it up meant nothing, that she would go home and sleep, and in the morning everything would look different. But even as she thought it, some part of her that was very honest with herself understood that the moment she touched that card, something had already shifted. The question wasn't whether she was going to call Vincent Blackwood. The question was whether she was brave enough to admit she already knew she would. Outside, the city was indifferent and enormous and blazing with November light. Claire Whitmore pushed through the door and walked into it alone. She drove home with the card in her jacket pocket and didn't touch the radio. The apartment she'd lived in for 4 years was on the 3rd floor of a converted building in Wicker Park. Narrow hallways, original hardwood floors that groaned in particular spots she'd memorized. A kitchen window that looked out over an alley where someone had painted a mural of a woman with her arms spread wide and her face turned up. Claire had always liked that mural. It had felt, when she first moved in, like a declaration of something. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time without turning on the lights. The card was on the table in front of her. Just a number. No name. As if the name was unnecessary, which it probably was. There were not many men in Chicago who could hand a woman a card like this and expect to be understood without explanation. She thought about calling her friend Dana, who was practical and direct, and would probably tell her to go to bed and deal with it in the morning. She thought about calling her colleague Marcus, who had known Evan slightly and had never fully trusted him and would probably say something infuriating like "I told you." She didn't call anyone. She sat with the silence and let it be what it was, which was enormous and also strangely clarifying. The betrayal wasn't what was keeping her awake. The betrayal she could process had already begun processing in the elevator on the way down, the way her mind organized crisis, because it had been trained to. 8 months. Madison and Evan. The lies that would have required sustained effort, sustained coordination, sustained contempt for her, that she could name and box and set aside. What was keeping her awake was the other thing. She's been passing information about Evan's operations to the Hawthorne family for the past 6 months. She opened her laptop and started searching. She was careful. She'd learned enough in 2 years adjacent to the Blackwood name to know that certain searches left traces that careful people noticed. She stayed to public records, court filings, archived news stories, nonprofit disclosures. It took her most of the night. She drank 2 cups of coffee that went cold before she finished them, and she sat hunched over the screen in the dark kitchen, and she read. Vincent Blackwood, 52 years old, born in Chicago's South Side to a family that had been in organized crime since before he was old enough to understand what organized crime meant. Had consolidated the Blackwood organization by the time he was 34, after a period in the late 90s that several archived news stories described with careful vagueness as significant internal restructuring, and which the court documents she found in a bankruptcy filing from a former Blackwood associate described rather less carefully. There were federal investigations on record, 2 of them, both closed without charges filed, which told its own story about the quality of his legal representation and the discipline of his organization. The expected material. She'd known most of the outlines of it, living adjacent to the family. What she hadn't expected were the other things. A hospital wing in Englewood, donated anonymously, traced through 3 shell companies to a holding group she found in a 2019 nonprofit filing. A scholarship fund for first-generation college students on the South and West Sides, operational for 11 years, funded through a structure so deliberately opaque. It had taken her 2 hours of cross-referencing to find the thread that connected it to the Blackwood organization. 3 residential programs for young people aging out of the foster care system, 2 in Chicago, 1 in Rockford, all funded through the same network of holding groups. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Then she found the one she hadn't been looking for. It was buried in a 2021 filing from a mid-sized foundation she'd never heard of. The foundation had provided a grant of $40,000 to her nonprofit, the Community Bridge Project, where she'd worked for 6 years, where she ran wraparound services for women leaving abusive situations. The grant had come with no strings attached, no reporting requirements beyond the standard ones, no contact person beyond a mailing address in the loop that turned out to be a law firm. $40,000. 3 years ago. She checked her memory against the organization's records in her head. The grant had arrived at exactly the moment they were about to lose their transitional housing contract for lack of funds. She had been the one who'd written the emergency appeals. She had been the one who'd sat in budget meetings watching the director's face go grim while they ran the numbers. The grant had arrived like an answer to something, and no one had questioned it too hard because that was how nonprofit finances worked when you were desperate. You took the money and you were grateful and you didn't examine the source at a cellular level. She stared at the screen. One of his shell companies has quietly donated money to Claire's nonprofit for years. He'd known who she was before tonight. That possibility sat in her chest with an entirely different weight than the betrayal had. She didn't sleep. At 7 in the morning, she showered and dressed for work and sat at the table again with fresh coffee and the card and thought about what she actually wanted. Not what she should want. Not what the reasonable, careful, appropriate version of herself would want. What she, Claire Whitmore, with her sister's flat face in her memory and the pale line on her ring finger and 4 days of silence still rattling around in her chest, actually wanted. She called the number at 7:43. It rang twice. I have conditions, she said, before he'd said anything beyond hello. A brief pause. I expected you would. I want to meet tonight, somewhere public, and I want you to answer questions directly, without the careful phrasing. There's a restaurant on West Randolph, he said. Lucero. I own it. Table will be ready at 8. She almost said something about the irony of meeting at a restaurant he owned in order to establish whether she could trust him. She didn't. She said she'd be there and she hung up and she went to work. Because her caseload didn't pause for personal catastrophe, and 3 of her clients were in situations considerably more precarious than hers. She got through the day by not thinking about any of it. This was a skill she had refined over years, the ability to close a door on one room of her mind while operating in another. Her supervisor noticed she was quieter than usual and didn't ask, which was one of the reasons Claire respected her. Marcus noticed and did ask, and Claire said she'd had a difficult week, and he accepted that with the grace of someone who knew when not to push. At 5:30, she sat in her car in the parking garage under the building and allowed herself exactly 10 minutes of falling apart. Not about Evan, surprisingly. About Madison. About the particular mathematics of a betrayal that had required her sister to look at her every time they'd seen each other over the past 8 months. Every Sunday dinner, every phone call, every time Madison had called needing something, and feel nothing particular about it, to lie with such consistency that it had become its own kind of fluency. The 10 minutes ended. She started the car. She arrived at Lucero at 7:58, and the maitre d' was expecting her and walked her to a table in a private alcove at the back of the restaurant where Vincent Blackwood was already seated with a glass of water and no phone visible anywhere. He stood when she approached. She noticed this. She noticed also that the 2 men who'd been at a table near the entrance when she walked in had shifted their attention to the room in a way that was professional enough that most people wouldn't register it. She sat down. He sat down. You found the donations, he said. Not a question. I found one of them, she said. How many are there? The Community Bridge Project has received funding through 4 separate instruments over the past 3 years, he said. A total of approximately $97,000. She kept her face still. Why? Because the work was necessary and underfunded, and you were doing it with competence and without adequate resources. He looked at her steadily. That is the complete answer. I don't attach obligation to charitable giving. You're a crime boss. Yes. Funding women's shelters, among other things. That's a contradiction. Most things are contradictions, he said. That doesn't make either half of them false. She looked at him for a moment. He held her gaze without effort, without performance. He wasn't trying to charm her. That, more than anything else he might have said, was what made her continue. My conditions, she said, and laid them out. Her career continued, full stop. She would not reduce her hours, change her organization, or allow his name to be attached to her professional work. Their marriage would begin as an arrangement with clear legal terms drafted by her own attorney, not his. Physical intimacy would not be part of the arrangement unless and until both of them chose otherwise. She retained the right to leave under conditions she would specify in the contract, with guaranteed financial independence that did not depend on his cooperation. And he would answer her questions, all of them, directly, for the duration of whatever this was. Vincent listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, Yes. That's it? Just yes? You stated your requirements clearly. They're reasonable. Yes. She'd prepared for negotiation. The absence of it was slightly disorienting. You're not going to push back on any of it. On what basis? You're walking into a significant risk for reasons that are partly personal and partly practical. You should have protections commensurate with that risk. He set down his water glass. I've been running an organization that requires me to accurately assess people's character and capability for 30 years. You are not someone I would choose to deceive. It would be both ineffective and wasteful. Claire looked at him. You're a strange man. I've been told. Is this actually about punishing Evan, or is it about something else? He considered this with what appeared to be genuine thought rather than performance. It's about several things at once, he said finally. Evan made a choice that was both personally contemptible and operationally stupid. The woman he discarded has more capability than he ever understood. Making that visible serves purposes beyond the personal. He paused. And yes, there is a personal element. I am not going to pretend otherwise. He's your nephew. He is. He is also someone who has spent his entire adult life taking for granted everything the people around him built. His voice didn't harden. It stayed exactly level, which was somehow more expressive than hardness. Including you. The restaurant moved quietly around them. Somewhere in another part of the room, someone laughed at something. 3 weeks, he said. That's the timeline I have in mind. Enough time to arrange it properly. Enough time for you to satisfy yourself with the legal terms. 3 weeks, she repeated, unless you need more. 3 weeks is enough. The engagement announcement went out 2 days later. Claire had not anticipated how fast it would move. Vincent's people handled the public relations mechanics with a precision that told her this was not their first time managing something sensitive. By 9 in the morning, the story was in 3 outlets. By noon, it was everywhere. By 4 o'clock, her phone had rung 47 times. She answered exactly 2 of those calls. The first was from her director, who was careful and professional and asked if Claire needed anything, and Claire said she was fine and appreciated it and meant both things. The second was from Evan. He called at 4:17 and she let it ring through, and then he called again at 4:22, and she picked up because she knew from experience that Evan did not stop calling once he'd started, unless you answered. "Tell me this is some kind of response," he said. His voice had the quality of a man who had been holding something together all day and was not going to manage it much longer. "Tell me this is you being angry and making a point." "It's not," she said. "Claire." He stopped, started again. "He's 52 years old. You know what he is. You know what his organization—" "I know what his organization is," she said. "I knew what yours was when I agreed to marry you. The difference is that you never actually told me. Vincent was honest with me from the first sentence." "Vincent is not—" He caught himself. She could hear him breathing. "He's doing this to humiliate me." "Maybe partly," she said, "but I'm doing it for my own reasons. Those are separate things. You're doing it to punish me." She thought about whether that was true, whether it was the whole truth or part of it. "I'm doing it because someone underestimated what I could survive," she said, "and I've decided not to let that stand." Silence on his end for a long moment. "Madison, don't," she said. Same word she'd used in his bedroom, same tone. "Don't bring her into this call." He didn't. He said her name one more time with the particular helplessness of someone who has run out of the kind of language that works, and she ended the call and set the phone face down on her desk and sat there for a minute with her hands flat on the surface. Then she went back to work. Because 3 of her clients were in situations considerably more precarious than hers, and that had not changed. Madison called at 6:45 that evening. Claire almost didn't answer. Then she thought about 4 days of silence and 8 months of lies and the specific flatness of her sister's voice in that bedroom, and she picked up. "You have to be joking," Madison said. Her voice was different from the night in the penthouse. The composure was gone, replaced by something with heat in it. "You have to be absolutely joking with this." "I'm not joking. He's a criminal, Claire. He runs—" "I know what he runs." "You are marrying a man, a 52-year-old man who has ordered people—" She stopped, started differently. "This is insane. You are doing this to punish me." "I'm doing this for my own reasons." "That is insane. You are a social worker. You work with women leaving violent situations. Do you hear yourself? Do you understand the irony of what you're—" "Madison." The word was sharp enough that her sister stopped. "You slept with my fiancé for 8 months. You looked me in the face every week for 8 months. You sat at my table and ate food I cooked, and you lied to me every single time." She kept her voice even. It cost her something. "You don't get to have opinions about the choices I make now. That's the part that doesn't exist anymore." Silence. "I know about the Hawthorns," Claire said. The silence changed texture. "I know what you've been doing," Claire continued. "I know what information you passed and to whom and for how long. So does Vincent. So does Evan, by now, or he will soon." She let that sit. "Whatever you think you were managing, Madison, you weren't. You thought you were playing both sides of something that has no middle, and now both sides know you exist." Her sister's breathing had become audible. "What are you going to do?" Madison asked. Her voice had lost something, the certainty, the composure, the particular Madison quality of always sounding like she was several steps ahead. Nothing, Claire said. I'm not going to do anything to you. I'm not going to help you either. What happens to you now is the result of choices you made, and you'll have to live with them. She paused. I hope you're somewhere safe. I mean that, but I'm done managing your consequences. She ended the call. Her hands were shaking slightly. She hadn't expected that. The shaking. She pressed them flat on the table until they stopped, and then she went to her kitchen and poured a glass of water and drank it, standing at the sink, looking out at the alley mural she'd always liked. The woman in the mural had her arms spread wide. Her face was turned up. Claire set the glass down. 2 weeks later, she moved into the Blackwood estate. The house sat on a bluff above Lake Michigan in a neighborhood where the trees were old enough to have their own presence, and the houses existed at intervals that suggested wealth old enough to find privacy natural rather than performative. It was not what she'd expected. She had prepared herself for something that broadcast power in the overt, tasteless way of men who needed to prove it. Marble and chrome and scale deployed as argument. What she found instead was a house that was large without being theatrical, furnished with the particular care of someone who spent time in rooms and wanted them to work. Her rooms were on the second floor. Bedroom, sitting room, a bathroom, with a window looking out over the lake. Adjacent to Vincent's suite, but separate, as they'd agreed. She unpacked her own things, the book she actually read, the framed photograph of her mother from before the illness, the particular lamp she'd bought herself with her first real paycheck, because she'd seen it in a store window and wanted it badly enough to wait 3 months until she could afford it. She put the lamp on the nightstand and it looked exactly right and wrong at the same time. The staff were professional and unreadable in the way of people who have learned that discretion is its own form of security. She met the head of household, a spare woman named Mrs. Calloway, who communicated primarily through implication and eyebrow position, and the head of security, a man named Reyes, who was polite, thorough, and seemed to be continuously calculating something. She was shown the security protocols, the encrypted phones, the routes, the procedures for different categories of threat. She absorbed all of it with the same capacity she brought to crisis management at work, which surprised Reyes enough that he said so. Most people ask fewer questions, he said. Most people aren't me, she said. That evening, she met Haley Blackwood. Evan's younger sister, 17 years old, was sitting in the kitchen at 8:30 at night, eating cereal directly from the box when Claire walked in looking for water. She had her father's dark eyes. He had died 4 years ago, from what Claire understood, and her mother's particular quality of sharp stillness that made her seem simultaneously older than her age and younger than she was pretending to be. She looked at Claire with the frank, unguarded hostility of a teenager who has decided not to waste time on subtlety. "So you married my uncle for revenge," Haley said. Claire got a glass from the cabinet, filled it at the sink, and sat down at the kitchen island across from her. "Partly," she said. Haley blinked. "You're just going to admit it. What would lying accomplish? You already know." Most adults would tell me some version of "it's complicated" and change the subject. "It is complicated," Claire said. "It started as revenge and it became something else before the wedding happened, and I can't tell you exactly when that shifted because I'm not sure I know. All of that is true at the same time." She looked at Haley steadily. "What I'm not going to do is pretend to you that any of this is simple, because you're smart enough to know it isn't, and pretending would just make me someone you can't trust." Haley looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, the calculation of someone deciding whether to allow something. "My brother is an idiot," she said finally. "Evan made choices," Claire said. "I don't think he's an idiot. I think he wanted things he hadn't earned and didn't understand the cost of that until it was too late." "That's a generous way to put it." "I'm working on generous," Claire said. "I don't always get there." Haley almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The first full week passed in a kind of contained strangeness. Claire went to work every morning in an armored vehicle with a driver named Sol, who was built like a shipping container and listened to public radio at low volume. She ran her cases. She attended her meetings. She sat across from women who were trying to piece lives together from the rubble of situations far worse than anything she was navigating, and she did her job, which was to be present and practical and honest about what was possible. She came home in the evenings to a house that was not hers and was becoming hers simultaneously. Vincent was present, but not intrusive. They ate dinner together 4 nights out of 7 that first week, conversation that began formal and became less so, following no script she could identify. He asked questions about her work that were more specific than polite. He had clearly read about the nonprofit, understood its funding structure, had opinions about legislative gaps in state-level social services that were more informed than she'd expected. She pushed back on two of his positions. He listened, reconsidered one of them, held the other, and explained his reasoning in a way that acknowledged she disagreed without dismissing the disagreement. She told Dana about the dinner conversations. Dana was quiet for a moment. "You like him," Dana said. "I respect him," Claire said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "I'm aware of that." "Claire." "I'm aware of it, Dana." She wasn't ready to do more than be aware of it. That was the honest answer. She kept that answer to herself, in the room of her mind with the closed door, and she went about the business of her days. It was on a Thursday of the second week, 2 days before the wedding, that Vincent called her into his study at 11 at night. She knocked and went in. I was standing at the window that looked out over the lake, and he had his phone in his hand and his back was partly turned, and she knew from the set of his shoulders, she had already learned to read his shoulders the way you learn any architecture you spend time in, that something was wrong. He turned when she came in. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." "Okay," she said. "The vehicle that hit your convoy this afternoon," he started, and she said, "What convoy? I wasn't in a—" "Not yours," he said. "The decoy vehicle. The one Reyes runs parallel to your route as standard protocol." He paused. "Someone hit it on purpose, Claire. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't random. They knew the route. They knew the timing. They knew enough about our security procedures to target the decoy rather than the primary vehicle, which means—" He stopped. "Which means someone inside this house told them," she said. He looked at her. "There's a leak," she said, "in your organization." "In my household," he said, which is a more specific and considerably more dangerous thing. The lake was black beyond the window. The house was quiet around them. "Does Reyes know?" she asked. "Reyes identified it 40 minutes ago. He's containing the situation." He set his phone down on the desk. "But Claire, whoever gave them the route information also gave them yours. The real one." He held her gaze. "They know where you work. They know the times. They know which vehicle is actually carrying you." She absorbed this. "The Hawthorns," she said. "The Hawthorns," he confirmed. "Because of Madison. Because of what Madison told them about Evan and what they subsequently learned about our arrangement and what they've decided that arrangement means for their position." He was very still. "They're not trying to send a message. They're trying to prevent the wedding. The wedding that was 2 days away. The wedding that had begun as revenge and had, somewhere in the past 3 weeks, become something she was no longer certain she wanted to stop." She looked at Vincent Blackwood standing in the lamplight of his study with the lake behind him and the controlled tension in his frame and the particular way he was looking at her. Not the way someone looks at an asset they're protecting, but the way someone looks at a person they're frightened of losing, and something in her chest did a thing she wasn't ready to name yet. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I need you to trust me for the next 48 hours, he said, "and I need you to stay inside this house." She thought about her clients, her caseload, Soul and his public radio. "My clients, Marcus can cover your cases," he said. "I've already contacted your director. I told her it was a family emergency." She stared at him. "You called my director?" "I did." "Without asking me." "Without asking you," he said, and for the first time she saw something on his face that might have been the beginning of discomfort. "I should have—" "Yes," she said. "You should have." "You're right. Don't do that again." "I won't," he said. Simple. Immediate. She held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded, once. 48 hours, she said. She turned and walked it out of his study and down the hall to her room, and she sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and pressed her fingers against her sternum where something was happening that she didn't have a name for yet. And outside the window the lake moved under the winter sky, enormous and indifferent and completely unaware that 2 days from now everything was going to change in ways that neither of them had fully prepared for. She didn't sleep. She lay on top of the covers with her clothes still on and stared at the ceiling of the room that was becoming hers and listened to the house settle around her. The particular sounds of an old structure at night, joists and pipes, and the distant pressure of wind off the lake, finding the edges of windows. At 2 in the morning, she got up and stood at her window and looked out at the water. It was November, dark and moving, catching what little light there was and throwing it back in pieces. 48 hours. She turned the number over in her mind. 2 days. The wedding was in 2 days, and someone inside Vincent's household had given her route, her actual route, her real vehicle, her specific times, to the Hawthorne organization, which meant someone inside this house had looked at the situation and decided that preventing the wedding was worth whatever the Hawthornes were paying, or offering, or threatening. She thought about that word. Inside. She'd been here 2 weeks. She knew Mrs. Calloway, Reyes, Saul, the kitchen staff by face, if not by name. The 2 security rotations she saw in the mornings and evenings. She knew Haley's cereal preference and the specific groan of the 3rd stair from the top. She had begun, in the way of someone who pays close attention as a survival mechanism, to learn the rhythms of the house. She had not learned who in it wanted her dead. At 3:15, she heard footsteps in the hall. Deliberate, unhurried, the gait of someone who owns the ground they're walking on. They stopped outside her door. She watched the strip of light under the door for a long moment. Then the footsteps continued past and down the corridor toward Vincent's study, and she heard, very faintly, the sound of a door closing. She made a decision. She pulled on her shoes and went after him. He was at his desk when she came in without knocking. He looked up and didn't appear surprised to see her, which told her he'd known she wasn't sleeping, which told her he hadn't been either. He had papers spread across the desk. Not files she recognized, something operational, detailed enough that he turned one of them face down when she came in. Old habit. She noted it and didn't comment. "Who is it?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Reyes is still working on confirmation." "Who does he think it is?" A pause. "A man named Garrett. 3rd year on the security rotation. Came in 18 months ago with a solid background. Former private contractor. Good references. Clean record." He paused. "The kind of record that looks clean because someone built it to look that way." "Hawthorne plant," she said. "Almost certainly." She pulled the chair from the corner of the room and sat down across from his desk. Not in the formal visitor position, but at an angle. The way she sat in hard conversations at work when she needed someone to understand she wasn't going anywhere. "What happens to him?" she asked. Vincent's expression shifted, not away from her, but inward. The particular quality of a man deciding how much of himself to show. "He'll be dealt with," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the answer I have." "Vincent." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking for your protection. I'm asking to understand what I'm inside of. There's a difference." He was quiet for a long moment. The lamp on his desk threw a circle of yellow light that stopped just short of where she was sitting. Outside, the wind had picked up. "He'll be removed from the property," he said. "He'll be questioned. Whatever he knows about Hawthorne's internal operations will be extracted. Then he'll be turned over to people who specialize in ensuring that former assets don't become future liabilities." He paused. "No one will die. I'm telling you that specifically because I know it's the question underneath the question." She absorbed this. "You specialize in exactly that kind of answer," she said. "Honest enough to be credible, vague enough to not be actionable." "Yes," he said. "I do." She almost smiled. Almost. "Sleep," he said. "I'm not going to be able to, so one of us should." "You were a stranger 3 weeks ago," she said. "Yes." "I'm about to marry you in 2 days." "Yes." "And someone in your house tried to have me killed. Tried to have your vehicle located," he said. "There's a material difference. They passed the route. They didn't arrange the actual hit. That was outsourced to Hawthorne's people, which means the information traveled from here to there through at least 2 intermediaries before it became operational, which means Reyes had time to run the decoy protocol, which is why you're sitting in this chair having this conversation instead of—" He stopped. "Instead of being in a hospital," she said. "Instead of being considerably worse off than a hospital," he said. The lamp hummed. The wind pressed against the glass. "Go to sleep, Claire," he said, and his voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not an order, not even a request, something more stripped down than either. The sound of someone who was genuinely worried and was not accustomed to the feeling. She went back to her room. She didn't sleep, but she lay down, and eventually the dark outside the window began to gray at the edges, and that was enough. The next morning arrived with the specific blankness of a day that has bad things waiting in it. She was dressed and downstairs by 7. The kitchen was quiet, only Mrs. Calloway moving with her characteristic efficiency, coffee already made, breakfast she hadn't asked for set out on the island. Haley was not at the table. The house had a different quality than it had the previous day. Tighter, more contained, the particular atmosphere of people who are being professionally calm about something. Reyes came in at 7:40. He was a man who did not waste movement or expression, and this morning both were more economical than usual. He set a tablet on the island in front of her without preamble. "Garrett's been removed," he said. "He's talking." "Already?" she said. He wasn't prepared to be identified this quickly. He expected more time. Reyes's voice was flat. "He's been feeding information since the arrangement was announced. Route schedules, household staff rotations, your workplace timing." He paused. "And one other thing." The way he said it made her set down her coffee. "The Hawthorns weren't acting on their own initiative," Reyes said. "Someone approached them. Someone gave them the case for moving against the wedding and provided the initial intelligence that made it viable." He looked at her steadily. "That someone is not from the Hawthorne organization." She waited. "Garrett says the contact was a woman," Reyes said. "Young, dark hair. She met with Hawthorne's logistics coordinator 3 times in the past 2 weeks. The last meeting was 4 days ago." He slid the tablet toward her. On the screen was a still image, grainy, from what appeared to be a parking structure camera. The quality was poor. The figure was partially turned away. But Claire knew the way that figure held her shoulders, had known it since they were children. The coffee cup was still in her hand. She set it down on the island with a precision that was entirely about control. "Madison," she said. Not a question. The word came out flat and final, like a door closing. Reyes said nothing. "She didn't just pass information to the Hawthorns about Evan's operations," Claire said. Her voice was doing the thing it did when she was absorbing something terrible, going very even, very careful. "She went back to them after I told her I knew. After I warned her." She paused. "She escalated." "It appears so," Reyes said. "She gave them enough to plan an operation against a Blackwood convoy." "She gave them your schedule," Reyes said. "Yours specifically, not the decoy parameters. Those came from Garrett, but your actual daily movements came from someone who knew them from the outside, who you told, or who observed you from a position of—" "She visited me," Claire said. "She came to my apartment 4 days before I moved here. I thought she was coming to—" She stopped. She pressed her fingers flat against the countertop. "I thought she was coming to apologize." Reyes was looking at her with the expression of a man who has delivered bad news many times and has not found a way to make it easier. "She clocked your patterns," Claire said. "She sat in my kitchen and she watched me move, and she took that information and she sold it to the people who tried to—" She stopped. She breathed. She thought about Madison at 15, crying in a hospital hallway, the specific weight of her in Claire's arms. She thought about Sunday dinners and phone calls and the green kitchen she'd painted over an entire weekend. She thought about the flat certainty of Madison's voice, saying you were never right for his world. Then she thought about her sister sitting across from her in a familiar kitchen, memorizing her schedule. Something in her chest moved in a way that had no name for it. Not grief exactly, not rage. Something older and colder than either. "Where is she?" Claire said. "Unknown," Reyes said. "She's been off her phone and off her apartment lease since yesterday morning. She appears to have anticipated that Garrett would be identified." He paused. "She's more operationally sophisticated than we initially assessed." "She always was," Claire said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I just kept deciding she wasn't." She picked up her coffee and finished it standing at the island, and then she went upstairs and she knocked on Vincent's study door and went in without waiting. He was on the phone. He looked up at her face and ended the call. "Reyes told you," he said. "About Madison, yes." She came fully into the room and stood in front of his desk. "I want to know what you're going to do." "I'm going to find her," he said. "And then?" He looked at her. The particular quality of that look, honest and careful, and not insulting her with a softened aversion, was one of the things she had come to understand about him in 3 weeks. "She's your sister," he said. "Whatever I do will be done with that in mind." "That's not an answer either." "It's the best one I have right now." He paused. "She committed an act that nearly killed you, Claire." In my world, that has consequences that I don't have complete control over once certain parties become aware of what she did. There are people in my organization who view an attack on my household as, she's my sister. I know. She's 25 years old. I know. Whatever she's done, I know, he said, and this time the word had a weight in it that stopped her. Not dismissal. The opposite of dismissal. The full weight of someone who understood exactly what he was saying. I know, Claire. I'm telling you that I will do everything in my power to make sure the consequences are ones you can live with. But I need you to understand what I'm working against, and I need you to trust that what I'm trying to protect here is you. Not just your body, not just your physical safety, but the thing you are that I don't want this world to change. She looked at him. The room was very quiet. The wedding is tomorrow, she said. It is. You still want to go forward. That's your decision, he said. It has been since the beginning. She turned and walked to the window and stood looking out at the lake. It was gray today, sky and water nearly the same color, the line between them almost invisible. She thought about walking into that penthouse bedroom, the particular moment of understanding, the ring on the nightstand, the elevator, the lobby. She thought about a card with nothing on it but a number. She thought about Haley almost smiling at the kitchen island, about Saul's public radio, about a lamp that looked exactly right and wrong at the same time on a nightstand that wasn't hers yet. She thought about Madison in her kitchen, clocking her schedule. Find her, she said. Keep her safe. Whatever she did, keep her safe. I will try, he said. Don't try, she said. Do it. A beat of silence. Yes, he said. She turned from the window. She walked past his desk toward the door. Claire, he said. She stopped. The wedding, he said. If you want it, I'll be ready at 4, she said, and walked out. The rest of that day moved in the particular slow motion of days before significant events. She called Marcus and gave him specific notes on 3 active cases, the kind of detailed handoff that required her to be entirely present and functional, which was probably why she did it. The specificity was a rope back to something solid. Marcus sensed something and didn't ask, and she was grateful for it in a way she couldn't have explained. In the afternoon, she sat with Haley. The girl found her in the library, a room Claire had discovered in the second week, floor-to-ceiling shelves, and 2 chairs by the window that were clearly positioned for use rather than decoration. Haley came in, looked at Claire sitting in one of them, and dropped into the other one without asking. Evan called me, Haley said. Claire waited. He wanted me to tell him if you seemed upset. She paused. Or if you seemed like you were having second thoughts. What did you tell him? That I hadn't spoken to you, Haley said, which was true at that specific moment, and they both understood the precision of it. He sounds bad. I know. He doesn't understand how he got here, Haley said. He keeps waiting for someone to explain it to him in a way that makes it not his fault. She picked at the edge of her sleeve, a small, young gesture. He does that. He always has. Something goes wrong and he just waits for the version of the story where he's not responsible. That's a painful way to be, Claire said. Haley looked at her. You don't hate him. No. Even after everything. Hating Evan would require me to spend energy on Evan, Claire said. I'd rather spend it on other things. Haley was quiet for a moment. Then, are you scared about tomorrow? The honest answer moved through her before she could organize it into something diplomatic. Yes, she said. Of the wedding or of what happened yesterday with the... Both, Claire said. Different kinds of scared. Haley nodded. Like that was the right answer. Like the wrong answer would have been no. My uncle isn't easy, Haley said carefully. He doesn't let people in. Like, physically he lets them into the house and professionally he's surrounded by people, but actually letting someone... She stopped. He talks to you differently than he talks to anyone else. I noticed it the first week. Claire didn't say anything. I'm not trying to make it weird, Haley said. I'm just saying I notice things. She picked at her sleeve again. My mom used to say he was the loneliest person she'd ever met, who also happened to be the most powerful. She said those 2 things were connected. She was probably right, Claire said. That evening, an hour before dinner, Reyes came to find her with his tablet again. She was in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed, when he knocked. Something in the way he knocked 3 precise raps, none of the hesitation that usually preceded difficult conversations, made her stand up before he'd opened the door. He came in. He didn't sit down. He held the tablet with both hands and looked at her with the expression of a man who has a job to do and is doing it. "We found Madison," he said. The breath went out of her. She's alive," he said immediately. "She's not hurt." He paused. "She went to the Hawthorns directly. She walked into their operation on the north side approximately 4 hours ago and appears to have offered herself as a resident asset in exchange for protection." Claire stared at him. "She defected," she said. "That's one word for it," Reyes said. "She's currently inside a property we believe is controlled by the Hawthorne organization. She's not being held against her will, as far as we can determine. She walked in voluntarily." "She walked into a criminal organization," Claire said. "Voluntarily." "Yes." "Because she's afraid of what Vincent's people will do to her." "That appears to be the reasoning." "Or because she thinks she still has something to offer them," Claire said. Her mind was moving through it the way it moved through crisis scenarios at work. Not with her feelings, not yet. Those were available, but she wasn't letting them drive. "She thinks she can trade her knowledge of our household for ongoing protection. She thinks they'll keep her because she's useful." "That assessment is probably accurate," Reyes said carefully. "In the short term." "And in the long term?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Get Vincent," she said. He was there in 4 minutes. He came in and took in her face and took in Reyes's posture and said, "What happened?" Reyes told him. Concise, sequential, no editorializing. Claire watched Vincent's face during it, the stillness that was not blankness, the specific quality of a man processing information and simultaneously running its implications through a structure she couldn't fully see. When Reyes finished, Vincent looked at Claire. "She's made herself a bargaining chip," he said. "She's inside their operation, which means she has whatever protective value a source in our household carries, which means getting her out becomes an act that either looks like aggression against the Hawthorns or like negotiation," Claire said, "neither of which is simple." "No," he said. "And if the Hawthorns decide she's given them everything she has, then her value to them ends," he said. Flat, clear. "And their interest in keeping her safe ends with it." Claire sat back down on the edge of the bed. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs. She looked at a spot on the floor and let herself feel, for exactly the time it took to take 2 full breaths, the complete weight of what her sister had done and where it had put both of them. Then she looked up. "You said you would keep her safe," she said. "I said I would try," he said. "I said, don't try." "Claire, she's 25 years old and she has made the worst decisions of her life. And she is currently inside a building full of people who will eventually decide she's worthless, and I cannot—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "I cannot let that be how this ends, whatever she did. I cannot." Vincent was looking at her with that unguarded quality she'd seen in his study at 3 in the morning, the thing behind the control that was frightened and did not know what to do with being frightened. "The wedding is in 18 hours, he said. "I know. If I move against the Hawthorne property before the wedding—" "I'm not asking you to move against anyone," she said. "I'm asking you to be smarter than that." She held his gaze. "You told me yourself. You defeat enemies intelligently or you react with blind violence and lose things that matter. Which one of those is this?" He was very still. "She's inside," Claire said. "She's not a prisoner. She went in voluntarily, which means she can walk out. But she won't walk out on her own because she's terrified and she's made a catastrophic decision and she is waiting for someone to give her a way out that doesn't cost her everything." She paused. "I want to talk to her." The room went very quiet. "No," he said. "Vincent, absolutely not. She will listen to me. You walking into a Hawthorne operation the night before our wedding is not something I am capable of. I'm not asking you to let me walk in," she said. "I'm asking if there's a way to get a message to her, a call, something. Something that tells her she has a way out that isn't inside that building." He looked at her for a long time. "There might be a channel," he said finally. "Use it. If I open that channel, I'm acknowledging to the Hawthorns that I know where she is and that I'm willing to negotiate her exit. That changes the tactical situation in ways that Use it, she said again. Not loudly, but with everything behind it. He looked at her. She looked at him. The 18 hours between now and tomorrow sat in the air between them like a held breath. And then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened in a way she'd learned to read. Not fear, something adjacent to it. He looked up at her. "It's the Hawthorns," he said. They were calling him, which meant they already knew he knew, which meant Madison had told them that he would come for her, which meant her sister, in the middle of everything, had made one more calculation, had used herself as a tripwire, as leverage, as the opening move in something Claire couldn't yet see the shape of. Vincent answered the call. He listened for 11 seconds. Claire counted, because counting was something to do while her pulse did things in her throat. She was trying not to let reach her face. Then he lowered the phone. "They don't want territory," he said. "They don't want money." He looked at her with an expression that was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen on a man who made a living being guarded. "They want the wedding called off." She heard the words. She understood the words. She understood also, in the same moment, that this was no longer about revenge or arrangement or the strategic optics of who sat beside whom at whose table. This was the moment the thing between them either became real enough to the performance everyone had assumed it was from the beginning. The Hawthorns had Madison, and Madison was the price of the wedding. Claire looked at Vincent Blackwood and felt the ground she'd been standing on for 3 weeks shift completely beneath her, and understood that the woman who had walked into that penthouse bedroom 2 months ago, the careful, measured, rule-following woman who managed crises from a safe professional distance, was not the woman who was going to have to decide what happened next. Vincent didn't put the phone down. He stood with it loose in his hand at his side and looked at Claire with the particular expression of a man who has spent 30 years making decisions that other people had to live with, and was now standing in front of the one decision he couldn't make alone. "They want a response by midnight," he said. It was 9:47. Claire looked at the phone in his hand. She looked at his face. She looked at the window where the lake was doing its indifferent November thing outside in the dark. "They think I'll fold," she said. "They think I'll fold," Vincent said. You're the leverage they're using to get there. What happens to Madison if you say no?" He was quiet for a second too long. "Vincent." "They'll keep her," he said. "She has operational value for a limited time. When that time ends..." He stopped. "The Hawthorns are not a charitable organization. How long does she have value?" "Days. A week at the outside. She knows our household rotation, our staff, our vehicle protocols, or what she believes those protocols to be, since Garrett's exposure has already required us to change most of them." He set the phone on the nightstand. "After that, she's a liability. They're housing at cost." "So the clock is real," Claire said. "The clock is real." She stood up. She moved to the window and stood with her back to him, and her forehead not quite touching the glass, and let herself think without speaking, which was something he had learned in 3 weeks to give her space for. Madison had walked into that building voluntarily. That was the fact she kept returning to. Not pushed, not tricked, not pulled by anyone's hand. She had looked at the situation she'd created, the Garrett exposure, the incoming consequences, the specific terror of being a 25-year-old woman who had done genuinely dangerous things to genuinely dangerous people. And she had made a calculation. She had decided that the Hawthorns represented a safer bet than facing whatever came next in the Blackwood orbit, which meant she was still calculating, which meant she was still, underneath the catastrophic decision-making, her sister's sister, someone who looked at a problem and tried to engineer her way through it. The engineering was bad. It had been bad for months. But the instinct was one Claire recognized in her own chest. "She's not going to stay there voluntarily," Claire said. "She went in because she was scared. She's going to wake up tomorrow morning inside a Hawthorne property and realize that the thing she thought was protection is actually a cage with a shorter timeline than the one she was trying to escape." She turned from the window. "She'll want out. She just needs someone to make the out available." "I can't send people into that building," Vincent said. "I'm not asking you to send people into the building." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking what it would take to make the Hawthorns decide she's more trouble than she's worth," Claire said. "Not an assault, not a negotiation, something that makes keeping her operationally inconvenient." Vincent looked at her with an expression that was not surprise exactly. It was something more like recognition. The look of someone watching a thing they'd suspected was there reveal itself clearly for the first time. "You've been thinking about this since Reyes told you," he said. "I've been thinking about it since I understood what she did," Claire said. "Tell me what options exist." He sat down in the chair by the window, the one she hadn't offered, and he hadn't asked for, just took, with the unconscious authority of a man who always finds the position of clearest visibility in any room. He laced his fingers together and looked at the floor for a moment. "The Hawthorns have 3 vulnerabilities that are currently active," he said. "A financial regulatory review that's been building for 8 months. It won't produce charges, but the investigation itself is disruptive and expensive if it intensifies. A labor dispute at 2 of their legitimate front operations that's been manageable, but would become unmanageable with the right pressure applied to the right people. And a political relationship on the city council that's valuable to them and fragile." He looked up. "Any one of those accelerated simultaneously with the suggestion that the disruption is connected to their current house guest becomes an argument for why holding that house guest is costing more than it's producing." "All 3, Claire said. "All 3 simultaneously draws attention. All 3 simultaneously also resolves this before midnight," she said. He looked at her. "You have the connections to move all 3 tonight," she said. "Don't tell me you don't." "I have the connections," he said. "Moving all 3 in the same window creates a signature. People will know it was coordinated. People will know it came from this house." "Good," she said. He blinked. "Let them know," she said. "Let them understand exactly what it looks like when you decide to be inconvenient. That's the message, isn't it? Not the specific pressure points. The message is that you can do this, that you can reach all 3 at once, and that you're doing it because they made the mistake of using someone you're protecting as a bargaining chip." She held his gaze. "Make it clear that holding Madison costs more than releasing her, and make it clear before midnight." The room was very quiet. Vincent Blackwood looked at Claire Whitmore, who had walked into his nephew's lobby 2 months ago with a pale ring line on her finger and composure that he'd found more interesting than anything he'd encountered in years. And something in his face shifted in the way of a tectonic thing, slow and total and not reversible. "Get Reyes," he said. She was already at the door. What followed was 2 hours that Claire would remember afterward, not as a sequence of events, but as a series of textures. The specific quality of the air in Vincent's study when he was on the phone. Low, clipped, a language she understood the grammar of without knowing all the vocabulary. The sound of Reyes's footsteps going and returning, going and returning. Mrs. Way appearing at 11 with coffee that nobody asked for and everybody needed. Haley coming to the study doorway at 11:15 and reading the room and disappearing again without asking questions, which was, Claire thought, one of the most mature things she'd seen anyone do in weeks. She sat in the corner of the study and let it happen around her. Not passively. She was present to every development, tracking, adjusting her understanding of the situation as new information arrived. But without inserting herself into the operational mechanics, which were Vincent's territory and which she understood required a particular kind of focused attention, she would only disrupt. At 11:40, Vincent's phone rang. He picked up. He listened for 31 seconds. Claire watched his jaw. It did not tighten. That was significant. He said 2 words, "Release her." Then he ended the call. He looked across the room at her. "She'll be at the East Gate in 20 minutes, he said. Claire stood up. Her legs were steadier than she expected. "I want to be there," she said. "I know," he said. "Sol's already at the car." The east gate of the Blackwood property was a secondary entrance, not the main approach, set into the perimeter wall where the tree line came closest to the road. Claire stood in the cold with Sol 6 feet to her left and Reyes somewhere in the dark behind her, and watched the road. The temperature had dropped through the evening into the kind of cold that wasn't just weather, but a physical argument. Wind coming off the lake with genuine intent, biting at the exposed skin of her face and neck. She didn't go back for a coat. The vehicle that came was unremarkable, a dark sedan with clean plates, moving at normal speed. It stopped 20 yards from the gate. The door opened. Madison got out. She was wearing the same jacket she'd had on when she came to Claire's apartment 4 days ago. Her hair was loose, and she was moving with the careful posture of someone who has been very tense for a very long time and hasn't yet been able to let it go. She looked at Claire across 20 yards of frozen ground, and Claire looked back at her. Then Madison walked forward. She stopped 4 feet away. She looked terrible, not physically hurt, but the specific devastation of someone who has been living inside the consequences of their own decisions without enough insulation. Her eyes were red at the rims. Her jaw was set in a way that was trying to be steadiness and wasn't quite making it. "Don't," Claire said before Madison could speak. "Whatever you were going to say first, don't." Madison closed her mouth. "You walked into a Hawthorne property," Claire said. Her voice was even. She had decided on even. "You did that the night before my wedding, after you spent 2 weeks giving my schedule to people who used it to target a vehicle convoy." She paused. "I want you to stand there for a second and understand that I know all of that, and I came to this gate anyway." Madison was breathing audibly. The cold was sharp enough that her breath was visible. "I'm not going to ask you why," Claire said. "Not tonight. Tonight you're going to come inside this house, and you're going to sleep somewhere safe, and tomorrow I'm getting married. After that, we're going to have every conversation that needs to happen, and there are a lot of them, and they're going to be hard. But right now I need you to just—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "Come inside, Madison." Her sister's face did something complicated and private, and finally broke open in the way of a face that has been holding something too heavy for too long. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there in the cold with everything on her face and her hands loose at her sides. "Okay," she said. Her voice was wrecked. "Okay," Claire said. She turned and walked back through the gate, and after a moment she heard Madison's footsteps on the frozen ground behind her. They did not sleep. Madison was given a room on the ground floor. Not locked, not guarded from the outside, though Claire understood from the arrangement of things that Reyes had people within response distance throughout the night. She understood also that this was a concession Vincent had made without being asked, and that it cost him something in terms of organizational optics that she would have to account for later. She sat in her own room and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house. At 2 in the morning, she heard the floor creak in the hallway, the specific third stair groan that she'd learned, and then a light knock at her door. She said, "Come in." Vincent opened the door and stood in the doorframe. He was still dressed, hadn't tried to sleep either, or had and given up. He looked at her in the way he'd been looking at her with increasing frequency over 3 weeks, which was directly and without the careful management she'd observed him apply to nearly every other interaction. "The Hawthorne response," he said. "They've agreed to stand down from the wedding. What we moved tonight bought more than Madison's release. It bought us the space to do this without a direct confrontation. For now," she said. "For now is all any of this ever is," he said. "In my experience." She looked at him. "Are you all right?" He seemed slightly surprised by the question. "I'm functional." "That's not what I asked." He was quiet for a moment. He came fully into the room, not far, just enough to close the door behind him, and looked at her with the expression she'd first seen in the lobby of Evan's building. Measuring. Honest. Too controlled by habit to be entirely readable, but making an effort. "When Reyes told me what the call was," he said, "when I understood what they were asking, there was a period of approximately 40 seconds where I was going to say yes." She looked at him. "I was going to agree to call it off," he said. "And I was going to do it, not because of what they were threatening, but because I couldn't identify a version of this where you came through it without damage, and I—" He stopped. Started differently. "I am not accustomed to finding that calculation difficult." "But you didn't say yes," she said. "You were already thinking through alternatives before I'd finished processing the call," he said. "You had a framework and a logic, and you were 2 steps ahead of me in terms of how to actually solve it." He paused. "I've spent 30 years as the person who is always 2 steps ahead." "And?" "And I found it." He appeared to search for the word. "Clarifying." She looked at him for a long moment. The room was very quiet. Outside, the lake was doing its thing, enormous and indifferent. "Get some sleep," she said. "You're getting married tomorrow." Something moved across his face. "So are you," he said. "I know," she said. He stood there for another moment. Then he nodded once, the small, precise acknowledgement she'd learned to read as the most unguarded affirmative in his register, and opened the door and went out. She sat for another hour with her lamp on and her hands in her lap, and let herself understand slowly and without rushing it what was happening in her own chest. It was not convenient, It was not what she'd planned. It was, she thought, the thing that happened when you stopped being careful for long enough to let something real through. She turned off the lamp. She lay down. For the first time in 2 days, she slept. Morning arrived with cold light off the lake and the specific organized chaos of a house, preparing for an event of significance. She was aware of it peripherally, staff moving with purposeful efficiency, florists arriving at the side entrance, Mrs. Calloway managing everything with her eyebrow-based communication system. Claire ate breakfast alone in the kitchen at 7, standing at the island with coffee and toast, and was left entirely alone to do it, which she suspected was Vincent's instruction. Haley appeared at 7:30. She looked at Claire for a moment. "Your sister's up," she said. "I know." "She made herself coffee. She's sitting in the garden." A pause. "It's like 30 degrees outside." "That tracks," Claire said. Haley looked at her. "Are you okay?" "I'm getting married in 9 hours," Claire said. "I'm somewhere between okay and something else that doesn't have a word yet." "That's honest," Haley said. "I'm practicing," Claire said. At 9 o'clock, she went to the garden. Madison was exactly where Haley had said, sitting on one of the stone benches near the far wall, the lake visible through the bare trees, a coffee mug held in both hands. She'd borrowed a coat from somewhere. It was too big for her, navy blue, probably Haley's. She looked up when Claire came out. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Claire sat down on the bench. Not close. Not far. The cold was immediate and exact, and neither of them acknowledged it. "I knew what I was doing," Madison said finally. Her voice was rougher than usual. "When I came to your apartment, I knew when I left." She looked down at her coffee. "I told myself I was managing a situation. I kept telling myself I was handling it, protecting myself. By giving them my schedule," Claire said. "I told myself it wouldn't go where it went." She looked up. "I know it went where it went," Claire said. "You know that." Madison's jaw worked. "The decoy vehicle. The decoy vehicle is why I'm sitting here," Claire said. "And Reyes's protocol, and the fact that Vincent's security is better than the Hawthorns understood." She paused. "But you put me in the position where all of those things needed to work perfectly, and they did, this time." She held her sister's gaze. "Do you understand what this time means?" "Yes," Madison said. It was barely a word. More the sound of someone accepting weight. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," Claire said. "I'm not your caseworker. I'm not your manager. I'm your sister. And I'm telling you that whatever you thought you were navigating with Evan and the Hawthorns, you're done with it. All of it. You exit cleanly, you disappear from both orbits, and you start over somewhere that isn't Chicago." She paused. "Vincent will arrange the exit. That's already decided. You don't have to ask for it." Madison blinked. "He's doing that," she said. Because I asked him to," Claire said. "And because he's more complicated than anyone gives him credit for." She paused. "Including me for about the first week." Madison looked at her. Something in her face that was usually armored dropped briefly, and what was under it was younger than her actual age. "I don't know how to say sorry for this," she said. "I know," Claire said. "We're going to need more than one conversation. More than 1 year of conversations, probably." She looked out at the lake. "But I'm not cutting you off. I want to be clear about that. What you did doesn't get to end us. It gets to reshape us." She paused. "That's going to take time." Madison nodded. Her eyes were very bright. She was keeping it contained with visible effort. "You're really marrying him," she said. It hasn't been still anything for at least 2 weeks," Claire said. "Maybe longer. I wasn't keeping close enough track." She stood up. "Come inside. It's 30 degrees and I need to get my hair done." For the first time in weeks, something that was almost a real smile crossed Madison's face. Small, brief, and genuine. "Okay," she said. The afternoon organized itself in the way of significant events. Not smoothly, because nothing significant was ever smooth, but with its own momentum. Claire dressed in a room that Mrs. Calloway had transformed with an efficiency that suggested she'd done this before and didn't need to discuss it. The dress was the one she'd chosen herself, with no consultation. Ivory, simple cut, nothing that looked like it was trying to declare something. She had not wanted a dress that announced itself. At 3:15, someone knocked at her door. She expected Mrs. Calloway. It was Evan. She stood in her doorway and looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. He had dressed carefully. He was holding his hands in front of him with the specific posture of a man who has rehearsed what he wants to say and is now not sure any of it is right. He looked bad, not catastrophically, but honestly, the kind of bad that comes from weeks of sleeping poorly and thinking harder than you're accustomed to. 5 minutes, he said. That's all. She stepped back and let him in. He stood in the center of the room and looked at her and then looked away, at the window, at the floor, at the arrangement of things that were now hers on the nightstand. I wanted to tell you I was wrong, he said. Not to ask for anything, just... He stopped. I wanted someone who wasn't a therapist to hear it. I started seeing someone 3 weeks ago. He looked back at her. She keeps asking me why I made the choices I made, and I keep answering, and the answers keep being smaller than the question. He paused. I think the honest answer is that I thought the people who loved me would always absorb whatever I did, that there was no actual limit. He paused again. There was a limit. Claire looked at him. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to... I know, she said again. I'm not waiting for more, Evan. I heard you. She looked at him steadily. I forgive you, I mean that. Not because it erases anything, but because carrying the weight of it doesn't help me. She paused. You should leave Chicago for a while, not forever. Just go somewhere and build something that's actually yours. Not your family's. Not what you thought I needed you to be. Yours. He looked at her for a long moment. Madison is handled, she said. Don't worry about Madison. He nodded slowly. He looked at the lamp on the nightstand. Her lamp, the one she'd bought herself with her first real paycheck because she'd wanted it badly enough to wait. He looked at it like it meant something he couldn't name. I wanted something good, he said. I just didn't want to have to be good to deserve it. I know, she said. That's the whole story, isn't it? He almost smiled. It was the most honest expression she'd seen on his face. Yeah, he said. I think it is. He left. She stood in the room for a moment after the door closed and pressed her hand flat over her sternum and let the moment be what it was, complex and sad, and not the kind of sad that required anything more from her. Then she straightened and turned to the mirror. The ceremony began at 4:15, running 15 minutes behind what anyone had planned, because the lakeside garden needed 2 more heaters positioned, and the florist had made a judgment call about the centerpieces that Mrs. Calloway disputed with impressive intensity for approximately 11 minutes. The garden held perhaps 60 people, politicians, businessmen, family allies, and men who represented various categories of power that didn't have clean professional titles. They were dressed well and spoke quietly and watched the grounds with the trained peripheral awareness of people who never fully stopped working. Claire walked out into the cold lakeside air and did not shake. She walked toward Vincent Blackwood, who was standing in the gray November light with the lake behind him and his hands loose at his sides, and who was watching her with an expression that contained more than she had seen him allow in any public context. Not performed emotion, not the managed presentation of a man who understood the optics of this moment, but something actual and uncontrolled and slightly frightening in its sincerity. He was, she thought, in approximately the same state she was, which was to say, certain and scared and not willing to let either of those things stop the other. She reached him. She was close enough now to see the specific line of tension in his jaw, the way his breathing was slightly more deliberate than usual, the fact that he was holding the stillness in his frame with conscious effort. You're late, he said quietly. Heaters, she said. Mrs. Calloway looked homicidal. She was, briefly. Claire looked at him. You're nervous. I haven't been nervous in years, he said. I find I dislike the sensation. It means something matters, she said. Yes, he said. That's the part I dislike. The officiant said something that required their attention, and they both turned to face forward. The lake caught what winter light was available and threw it back in pieces across the assembled crowd, and Claire stood in the cold with her hands steady at her sides and felt, in the particular way of moments that contain everything that has led to them, the weight and texture of the past 2 months. The ring she'd set on Evan's nightstand, the elevator, the lobby, the card with nothing but a number, a lamp that was hers on a nightstand that was becoming hers, the east gate and the dark and frozen footsteps behind her. Haley almost smiling. Marcus covering her cases. Madison's wrecked voice saying, okay. Vincent's face at her doorway at 2 in the morning, clarifying, he'd said. I promise, she said, when it was her turn to say something, to stand beside you without losing myself, and to tell you when you're wrong. The corner of his mouth moved. I promise, he said, to listen when you do. And then the officiant said what officiant said, and Evan was somewhere in the crowd behind her, and Madison was somewhere inside the house watching through glass. And Chicago lay beyond the trees, enormous and indifferent and burning gold in the November light. And Vincent Blackwood reached for her hand. And Claire took it, not because she needed to, not because the arrangement required it, not because of anything she'd walked into that penthouse bedroom looking for 2 months ago, but because she was choosing it right now in this specific moment with full knowledge of what it meant. And then something happened that nobody in the garden had anticipated. A phone rang. Not one phone. Several in rapid succession. The particular staggered sequence of an emergency alert moving through a group of people who were all connected to the same operational network. Vincent's hand tightened on hers. His head didn't turn, but she felt the tension move through him like current. Reyes materialized at the edge of the garden from wherever he'd been positioned. He was moving with the specific contained urgency of a man who has very bad news and is managing the speed at which he delivers it. He reached Vincent's side. He bent and said 3 words directly into Vincent's ear. Vincent's grip on her hand became briefly, involuntarily, almost painfully tight. Then he controlled it, smoothed it, brought his face back to neutral. He looked at the officiant. Finish it, he said. Quiet. Final. The officiant blinked, said the last words. Claire looked at Vincent's face. What is it? She said. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent 30 years protecting everything around him and has just been told that the perimeter he thought was secure has been breached in a way he hadn't considered possible. The Hawthorns didn't stand down, he said. They agreed to give us Madison. They agreed to clear the wedding space. His voice was very low, beneath her hearing almost. What they didn't agree to was leaving afterward. She felt the cold differently now. Not weather, something else. They're here, she said. 3 vehicles, he said, positioned on the access road. He paused. They didn't come to stop the wedding. Then why? Because the wedding is finished, he said. Because now I'm standing in a garden surrounded by 60 witnesses, and my entire security infrastructure is arranged for an event, not a confrontation. He looked at her steadily. They waited for the exact moment when everything I've built is gathered in one place, and I am the least able to respond. She understood. They're not coming for Madison, she said. They're not coming for the wedding. No, he said. They're coming for you. The garden had begun to register that something was wrong. The particular ripple that moved through a crowd of experienced people when the air changed quality. Men who had stopped making casual conversation, women touching their partner's arms. Reyes moving with purpose now, no longer containing his urgency. Vincent looked at Claire, and she looked back at him. This man she'd married 7 minutes ago, this stranger she understood better than she'd understood Evan in 2 years, this complicated and lonely and capable and frightening person who had looked at her in a lobby and seen something worth proposing to. And she felt something she was done trying not to name settle into her chest like a key finding a lock. Tell me what you need, she said. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing the thing where everything in them was visible and controlled simultaneously. Stay behind Reyes, he said, no matter what happens. Vincent, Claire, her name in his voice, the whole weight of the last 2 months in it. Please. Outside the garden wall on the access road, 3 vehicles had stopped and their engines were still running, and the night was coming in fast off the lake, and everything that had been building since a November evening in a penthouse bedroom was about to reach the moment it had always been moving toward. 3 vehicles on the access road, engines running. Reyes had his phone to his ear and was moving in the specific way of a man whose entire body has become a single operational decision. The garden crowd had gone the kind of quiet that experienced people go when the air changes quality. Not panic, not yet, but the cellular recognition of people who have lived adjacent to danger long enough to know its particular smell. Vincent's hand was still holding hers. He released it, not roughly, deliberately, the way you set down something you intend to pick back up. How many? He said to Reyes. Not a question. Quest for a number. Best count is 9, Reyes said. 3 per vehicle. Armed, but they haven't moved yet. They're positioned at the curve where the access road narrows. They can see the garden gate from there, but they can't be seen from the street. He paused. It's a containment position, not an assault position. They want to control who leaves, not storm what's here. They're waiting for the crowd to disperse, Vincent said. That's my read. Which means they're planning to take me off the property, not here, in front of witnesses. Yes. Claire was listening to all of this standing 2 feet away. She had not moved to behind Reyes. She had no intention of moving to behind Reyes. Vincent looked at her face and apparently decided that pointing this out would not be productive. The guests, Claire said. We move them out the north entrance, Reyes said. It routes through the main house and out to the secondary street. They can't see it from their position. How long to move 60 people without causing a stampede? 20 minutes if we're careful, 15 if we're less careful. Be careful, she said. These are 60 people who will be significantly less useful to us as witnesses if they're injured getting out of a garden. She looked at Reyes. Can your people hold the access road for 20 minutes without escalating? Reyes looked at her, then at Vincent. Yes, he said. Then do that, she said. Hold them there. Make it visible enough that they know we know where they are, but don't push. If they're waiting for the crowd to thin, let them wait. The crowd doesn't thin. Vincent said nothing. He was watching her with the expression she'd seen at 2 in the morning in his study, the one where something behind his careful machinery was running without the usual governor on it. It's a reasonable approach, Reyes said, carefully, like a man acknowledging something he hadn't expected to need to acknowledge. Do it, Vincent said. What followed was 20 minutes of managed chaos that looked, from the outside, like a post-ceremony gathering beginning to migrate indoors. Mrs. Calloway was extraordinary. Claire watched her move through the crowd with a glass of champagne in one hand and the absolute authority of a woman who has controlled difficult rooms her entire professional life, gently redirecting clusters of guests toward the north corridor with the manner of someone proposing a more comfortable alternative rather than executing an evacuation. The staff moved with her, smooth and unhurried. Claire stayed at Vincent's side. He didn't tell her to move. He'd stopped telling her to do things she wasn't going to do. That was, she thought, a significant development in the 9 minutes they'd been married. Haley appeared at the garden doorway at the 12-minute mark. She had Madison beside her. Both of them were looking at Claire with the particular expression of people who understand the shape of what's happening and have decided to wait for instruction rather than act independently, which was more discipline than Claire had expected from either of them, and which she noted with a specific private gratitude. She crossed to them. Inside, she said, north corridor and keep going. Saul will take you in the second vehicle. I'm not leaving, Haley said. Yes, you are, Claire said. This is my family's... Haley! Claire looked at her directly. You are 17 years old and you are the most important person in this house right now, which is exactly why you're leaving. You understand? Haley's jaw tightened. She was her uncle's niece in that moment. The same controlled resistance, the same assessment running behind the eyes. Fine, she said. One word, tight, meaning about 12 other things. Madison, Claire said. Madison looked at her. She had the expression of someone who has used up all their bad decisions and is running on something rawer and more honest. I'm not... She started. You're going, Claire said. This isn't negotiable and this isn't about what you did. It's about keeping you alive so we can have the conversations we need to have. She held her sister's eyes. Go with Haley. Stay with Saul. Don't use your phone. Madison looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. The two of them went. 13 minutes in, the garden was down to Vincent, Claire, Reyes, and 4 of Reyes' people positioned at intervals. The caterers had been moved inside. The florist had left confused and would probably call someone tomorrow. At 18 minutes, Reyes got the confirmation that the north exit vehicles were clear of the property. At 19 minutes, one of the 3 vehicles on the access road began to move. It pulled to the gate. It stopped. A man got out. He was perhaps 50, well-built, wearing a dark overcoat that hung with the weight of deliberate presentation. He moved with the specific, unhurried authority of someone who has decided the ground he's standing on is already his. Claire didn't know his name, but she understood from the way Vincent's posture changed. infinitesimally, controllably, but changed, that this was someone significant. Brennan Hawthorne, Vincent said quietly, beside her. Not to Reyes. To her. The head of the family, she said. The son. The father had a health event 6 months ago. Brennan's been running operations since March. He paused. He's 20 years younger than his father and considerably less patient. Brennan Hawthorne stopped at the gate and looked at the garden. He looked at the positioned security. He looked at Vincent, and then his gaze moved to Claire, standing at Vincent's left shoulder, and stayed there for a moment in a way that was assessment rather than dismissal. I'll come in, Brennan said. Just myself. Reyes looked at Vincent. Vincent looked at Claire. She gave him the smallest nod. He gave Reyes the smallest nod. The gate opened. Brennan Hawthorne walked into the garden of the Blackwood estate, wearing an expression of relaxed confidence that was performed well enough to be almost convincing. He stopped 10 feet from them and looked at the empty chairs and the abandoned champagne glasses and the winter flowers that Mrs. Calloway's florist had died briefly over. Congratulations, he said. His voice was smooth, Chicago-educated, the particular polish of someone who went to the right schools and spent years learning to weaponize social grace. I apologize for the timing. No, you don't, Claire said. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not offense exactly. Recalibration. Mrs. Blackwood, he said. That's current, she said. Yes. I have a proposal for your husband, Brennan said. His eyes went to Vincent. The vehicles on your access road are there to ensure the conversation happens, not to threaten the outcome. The distinction is noted and rejected, Vincent said. His voice had the quality she'd come to understand as his most dangerous register, completely level, completely stripped of heat. You positioned men on my property on the occasion of my wedding because you calculated I would be unwilling to escalate in front of witnesses. Those witnesses are gone. Revise your calculation. Brennan absorbed this without visible disturbance. He was good. Claire could see that. He had the practiced steadiness of someone who'd been trained to hold position under pressure. The Whitmore woman gave us operational intelligence for 6 months, Brennan said. Some of that intelligence concerns activities your organization has been conducting in territory we've historically considered ours. The Halstead Corridor. The 3 processing operations near the port. He paused. We're not here about the wedding. We're here about the information that made the wedding possible to target and what it revealed about your expansion. You're using my wife's sister as a pretext to relitigate a territorial question, Vincent said. I'm using a legitimate intelligence acquisition to open a legitimate conversation, Brennan said, about boundaries that you've been moving for 18 months without acknowledgement. The Halstead Corridor was abandoned by your organization in March of last year, Vincent said. The 3 port operations you're referencing occupy locations that your father agreed were outside your active territory in a conversation I had with him personally in April. A pause. Your father is ill. You may not have complete access to his records. Something moved behind Brennan's eyes. Fast, controlled, but there. He didn't have access to his father's records. Claire watched this understanding move through the room. She watched Brennan's jaw do the thing that jaws did when someone was recalculating in real time and didn't want it visible. I'd like to verify that, Brennan said. I'll have documentation to you by Tuesday, Vincent said. If your father is well enough to review it, I'd encourage you to have him do so. He paused. And Brennan, the next time you want a conversation, you call. You don't position vehicles on my property during my wedding. Are we clear on that distinction? Brennan looked at him, looked at Claire, something in his face that was close to respect, which was more than she'd expected. We're clear, he said. He turned and walked back to the gate. One of Reyes's people opened it. He went through. The vehicles on the access road started their engines and pulled away in sequence. And by the time the last one had turned off the access road, the garden was quiet and the lake was doing its evening thing. And Claire realized her hands, which had been very still for the past 25 minutes, were shaking slightly. Not from fear. From the release of the sustained effort of not shaking. Vincent looked at her hands. He didn't say anything about them. He reached out and covered both of them with one of his, briefly, the way you cover something to stop the cold from reaching it. The documentation, she said. Does it exist? It exists, he said. The April conversation is recorded and witnessed. He paused. Brennan's father was considerably more disciplined than his son. The conversation happened because the elder Hawthorne understood that certain acknowledgments protected everyone's interests. He looked at her. Brennan will understand the same thing eventually. Tonight accelerated his education. He's going to be a problem, she said. He's already a problem, Vincent said. He'll become a manageable one. He looked at the empty garden. After tonight, he knows that coming at this house during a moment of apparent vulnerability doesn't work the way he expected. That's a significant piece of operational learning. Reyes came back to them from the perimeter. He looked at Claire's hands and looked at Vincent and said, "Vehicles are clear. Property is secure. Your people on the north exit are confirming the secondary location reached safely." "Haley," Vincent said. "Confirmed safe at the secondary location," Reyes said. "Miss Madison also." Vincent's shoulders did something that was not quite visible but that Claire felt through the air beside him. The specific settling of a man who has been holding a structure upright by force of will and has been told he can ease the pressure for a moment. "Get the staff back in from the north," he said. "And tell Mrs. Calloway." He stopped. "I'll tell her," Claire said. She found Mrs. Calloway in the north corridor managing the return of the catering staff with the same precise efficiency she'd used to evacuate them. The older woman looked at Claire coming toward her, and her face did something complex and private, and then returned to its professional composure. "It's handled," Claire said. "The property is clear." "I'll have the kitchen prepare something," Mrs. Calloway said. "The meal wasn't served." "No one's hungry at the moment," Claire said. "But yes, something. Later." Mrs. Calloway looked at her for a moment with an expression that contained several years of observation compressed into a small space. "You handled yourself well," she said. It came out like a document being signed, an official acknowledgement. "I had good people around me," Claire said. Mrs. Calloway's left eyebrow moved approximately 2 millimeters. This appeared to be the equivalent, in her communication system, of a deeply felt agreement. The house resettled itself over the following hours. The catering equipment was broken down and removed. The garden furniture came inside. The flowers that hadn't been knocked over stayed where they were for now, because nobody had the particular energy required to make a decision about them. Sol brought Haley and Madison back at 9:30. Haley came through the door and went directly to Vincent and stood in front of him and said, "Tell me everything." He told her the compressed version. She listened with her arms crossed and her face arranged in the particular expression she used when she was processing something she wasn't going to let make her cry. "So it's handled," she said. "For now," he said. "For now," she repeated. "That's always the answer." "Yes," he said. "That's always the answer." She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached out and put her hand on his arm. Briefly, the gesture of a teenager who hasn't fully decided how much physical affection she's authorizing, and said, "Okay." Then she went to find something to eat. Madison stood in the hallway. She'd been standing slightly back from the Haley exchange, in the posture of someone who understands they're not the main character in this scene and is making an effort to honor that. When Haley had gone, she looked at Claire. "You're all right," she said. Not a question, taking inventory. "I'm all right," Claire said. Madison looked at the floor, then back up. "I heard some of it through the window in the side room." She paused. "You didn't go behind the security guy?" "No." "He told you to." "He did." Madison looked at her. "And he didn't. He just let you—" "He stopped telling me to do things I wasn't going to do," Claire said. At some point in the evening, that became the approach. Her sister made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one, small and exhausted and genuine. "I need to tell you something," Madison said. Claire waited. "The Hawthorns, when I went there, they told me something." She was looking at the floor again, picking the words carefully. "About why they wanted the wedding stopped. It wasn't just territory. It wasn't just Evan's operations." She looked up. "They said Vincent has been building something for the past 2 years. A structured exit, a plan to formalize and legitimize most of the organization's above-board operations and gradually step back from the rest." She paused. "They said a wife changes his timeline, makes it harder to keep him in the position where they can predict what he does." She paused again. "They were afraid of you, not of him, of what he becomes with someone beside him who isn't going to let him coast." Claire absorbed this. "They told you this," she said. I think they were trying to convince me that helping them was actually helping you, Madison said. Like, if the wedding didn't happen, you'd be safe from all of this. She shook her head. I knew it was manipulation. I let myself believe it anyway because… She stopped. Because it was easier than facing what I'd already done. I know, Claire said. I'm sorry, Madison said. I know it's not enough on its own, Claire said, but it's a start. She looked at her sister. You're leaving Chicago. I know. Vincent will arrange something. You'll have enough to start over somewhere. Not a lot. Enough. She paused. What you do with it is yours. Madison's throat moved. Claire, I love you, Claire said. That's not conditional, but the relationship has to rebuild from somewhere real, and it can't do that while you're here. Not yet. Madison nodded. She was holding herself together with visible effort, the specific tightness of a person whose instinct is to be composed and who has run out of the resources composure requires. Okay, she said. Same word she'd said at the East Gate in the cold, carrying the same weight of acceptance. The night deepened. The house went quiet in the way of houses after events. Not the empty quiet of a space between things, but the settled quiet of a place where something real has happened and the air hasn't returned to baseline yet. At 11, Claire found Vincent in his study. He was at the window. The lake was black and large and moving. He turned when she came in. She sat in the chair she always took, the one at the angle, not the formal position. He remained standing for a moment and then sat in the chair on the other side of the window, not behind his desk, which was itself a specific thing. Brennan Hawthorne told Madison something, she said, about what you've been building. He didn't look away from her. What did he say? That you've been planning an exit, a legitimate restructuring, she paused. That a wife changes your timeline. The Hawthornes have been watching my organizational changes for 18 months, he said. What they interpret as an exit plan is a gradual legitimization of the above-board operations. It's been in motion longer than 18 months, he paused. It's also true that the timeline has shifted. Because of me, she said. Because of several things, he said, some of which are you. She looked at him. Were you going to tell me? Yes. When? When I was certain you weren't going to leave, he said. A pause. Which is more recent than I'd like to admit. She sat with that for a moment. The lamp was throwing its circle of yellow light. The lake was outside. The house was quiet around them. Tell me now, she said. He told her. The full shape of it. The shell companies being gradually restructured into legitimate entities. The political relationships being redirected toward legal influence rather than criminal leverage. The long-term plan to hand off certain operations to younger figures and step back from the rest. It was not a clean exit. It was not quick. It was the kind of thing that took a decade and required sustained commitment and could be derailed by any number of external pressures. It was also, she understood as he described it, the thing behind all the other things. The reason a man in his position had funded women's shelters and foster care programs and her nonprofit specifically. Not guilt. Something more active than guilt. The understanding, built over 30 years of building an empire, that empires were not what he actually wanted. You've been trying to find a way out for years, she said. I've been building a way out for years, he said. Finding the will to move toward it is different. He looked at her. I am not a good man, Claire. I want to be clear about that. The things I've done over 30 years are not balanced out by charitable giving. I don't believe in that math. I know, she said. But I'm trying to become someone who does fewer of them, he said. And I've been trying for long enough that the organization actually believes it. The exit is structurally possible. It's just… He stopped. It's just hard, she said. It's just hard, he confirmed. She looked at the lake through the window, at the specific way the light from the house caught the water and turned it into something almost visible in the dark. The Hawthornes are going to keep coming, she said. Brennan is younger than his father and less disciplined and more afraid of what he doesn't control. Yes. And there are others. Other people who have an interest in keeping your organization exactly what it is because the alternative is unpredictable. Yes. So the path forward is going to be not easy, she said. No, he said. It will not be easy. But it's the path. If you're willing to walk it, he said. which is not something I assumed, then yes, it's the path. She looked at him, the man she'd married 7 hours ago. The stranger she understood better than she'd understood almost anyone. The person who had looked at her in a lobby and seen something worth proposing to, and who had turned out, underneath 30 years of carefully constructed, terrifying machinery, to be someone who was genuinely trying to move towards something different and genuinely didn't know if he was capable of getting there. She thought about this woman who had walked into Evan's penthouse bedroom, the ring on the nightstand, the elevator, the card. She thought about everything that had happened between that night and this one, and how none of it had gone the way any version of a reasonable plan would have predicted. "I told Evan something today," she said, "before the ceremony." "He came to you?" "He needed someone who wasn't a therapist to hear him," she said. "I told him that forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, that some relationships deserve peace and not resurrection." She paused. "I think I was also saying it to myself." "What were you forgiving yourself for?" She thought about it honestly. "For the 2 years I spent telling myself a story about Evan that I knew wasn't entirely true," she said. "For wanting the version of things that was comfortable over the version that required me to see clearly." She paused. "I was careful for so long. I managed everything. I thought that was the same as being strong." She looked at him. "It wasn't the same thing." "No," he said. "It wasn't." "Being strong is doing what you did tonight," she said. "Walking through the thing anyway, when it costs something." He was looking at her with the expression she'd come to understand as the most honest thing his face did. Stripped of management, stripped of the careful public machinery, just the actual person underneath all of it looking at her from whatever distance remained between them. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "When I offered you the proposal," he said, "in the lobby, I told you it was about several things simultaneously. I told you Evan's humiliation was one of the lesser ones." He paused. "That was true. What I didn't tell you, what I didn't have language for at the time, was that I'd watched you for longer than that lobby conversation." She waited. "Your nonprofit's work," he said. "The advocacy. The cases you took that other practitioners avoided because they were too complicated or too political or too unlikely to show good outcomes." He paused. "I was paying attention. For 2 years before that lobby. Not in any way that was... not in a way I acted on. But I was paying attention." She held very still. "You funded my organization because you were watching me," she said. "I funded your organization because the work was necessary and you were doing it with competence," he said. "And yes, because I was paying attention. Both things were true, and I won't separate them." He held her gaze. "I want you to know that. Because we agreed at the beginning that I would answer your questions directly. And the complete answer to how we got here includes that." She sat with it, the full weight and strangeness of it. A man who built criminal empires paying quiet attention to a social worker's caseload for 2 years because something in it spoke to the thing he was trying to become. "That's a strange way to fall in love with someone," she said. He was very still for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It is." She stood up. She crossed the room. She sat on the edge of his desk, not in a chair, on the desk itself, the way she sat when she needed to make herself physically present in a hard conversation, close enough that not looking at each other required deliberate effort. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I didn't come here for love," she said. "I came here for revenge and something to do with my hands after my life blew up." She paused. "And somewhere between the encrypted phones and the East Gate and the lamp on my nightstand that was mine first and yours second, I stopped being here for that." "I know," he said, quietly. "I need you to keep not calling my director without asking," she said. "I know," he said again. "I won't." "And I need you to understand that the exit plan," she said, "whatever it takes and however long it takes, I'm not going to let you stop moving toward it, even when it's hard, even when it would be easier to just stay what you are." He looked at her. Something in his face that was very quiet and very certain. "That," he said, "is exactly what I was hoping you'd say." She reached out and put her hand on his jaw, just her hand on the side of his face, the specific weight of a deliberate choice, unhurried, with full knowledge of everything it meant. He covered her hand with his. Neither of them moved for a moment. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did. Enormous and indifferent and burning with its own particular light, the lake beside it carrying the city's reflection in pieces across dark water. Winter had settled in completely now, the air sharp enough to mean it, the kind of cold that clarified rather than merely discomforted. Inside the study, in the lamplight, two people who had arrived at each other through the wreckage of other people's choices and their own sat, with the specific silence of something that had passed through its difficult part and come out the other side changed rather than destroyed. The weeks that followed moved with the ordinary texture of lives that have sustained something significant and are finding their footing in the aftermath. Madison left Chicago 12 days after the wedding. Vincent arranged it with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything. An apartment in a city neither of them needed to name aloud, enough money to begin without owing anyone anything, a contact who could help her find work that used the particular sharpness of her intelligence without requiring the moral compromises she'd been making for months. She came to say goodbye on a Thursday morning when the winter light was coming sideways through the kitchen window. She and Claire sat at the kitchen island. She had a coffee she wasn't drinking. "I don't know how to be," she said, I don't know how to be a person who doesn't have an angle. "You learn," Claire said, "slowly, and you make mistakes while you're learning, and you tell the truth when you make them." She paused. "That's the whole process." Madison looked at her. "That's it?" "That's it." Her sister made the almost laugh sound again. She'd been making it with increasing frequency over 12 days. It was becoming more real each time. "I'll call," Madison said. "I know you will," Claire said. "I'll answer." Madison picked up her coffee, set it down, stood up. "He's a strange man," she said, meaning Vincent. "He is," Claire said. "He's trying," Madison said. "I can see that he's actually trying." A pause. "I didn't think people like him did that." "I didn't either," Claire said. "For about the first week." Madison nodded. She picked up her bag. She stood at the kitchen doorway for a moment with the particular posture of a woman who has said most of what she needs to say and is letting the rest be said by the fact of leaving. "Be happy," she said. Simple. Meant. "Work on being happy yourself," Claire said. "That's the better project." Madison left. Claire sat at the island for a while after the car had gone. She drank her coffee. She looked at the alley mural she no longer had a window view of. This kitchen looked out over the lake, and she thought about the woman with her arms spread wide and her face turned up, and thought that she understood her differently now than she had from the third-floor window in Wicker Park. The arms weren't celebrating, they were just open, willing to receive whatever the next thing was. That was different from celebration, harder, actually, and more honest. Evan sent a message 3 weeks after that. Not a call. A text, which she'd come to understand was his way of communicating things that didn't require a response but that he needed to say. "I'm leaving for a while, not sure where." "Where? Somewhere I have to build things myself. I hope you're okay. I think you are. Take care of yourself." She typed back, "I am. You too. Mean that." She set the phone down. She did not feel satisfaction. She did not feel the particular hollow victory of someone whose revenge has worked the way they planned. She felt something quieter and more durable, the specific relief of a chapter that has genuinely ended rather than merely paused. Her nonprofit expanded in January. The charitable foundation structure that Vincent's legal team had established moved its first significant tranche of funding in February, opening 2 new transitional housing units in Chicago and beginning the groundwork for a third in Rockford. Claire ran the expansion with the same organized intensity she brought to everything, adding 2 case managers and a part-time psychiatrist, and fighting with the city's permitting office for 6 weeks over the Rockford location with a persistence that Marcus described as, quote, honestly alarming and also sort of inspiring. She told Vincent about the permitting battle in installments over dinner. He listened with the focused attention he brought to operational problems, asked 3 specific questions that turned out to be the right 3 questions, and made a call to someone who made a call to someone that resolved the permitting issue in 48 hours. She told him that was cheating. He said it was resource allocation. She said it was cheating, and she appreciated it. He smiled. The real one. The one that didn't announce itself. That arrived without performance. She was collecting those smiles. She hadn't told him that. She didn't need to. Haley turned 18 in March. Claire organized the party with Haley's specific and extremely detailed preferences as the blueprint and navigated the catering negotiation, the guest list management, and the absolutely non-negotiable playlist decisions with the skill of a woman who had spent 6 years managing complex multi-stakeholder situations and found that a teenager's birthday party was surprisingly similar in structure. During the party, she found Haley at the edge of the garden. Same garden, warmer now, the first suggestion of spring coming off the lake, standing with a glass of sparkling water and looking at the property with an expression Claire recognized. "Thinking?" Claire said. "My dad used to say this house was the most beautiful thing my uncle ever built," Haley said. "He said that was backwards. That beautiful things should be the things people build, not places." She looked at Claire. "I think he meant something like legacy. What you leave versus what you acquire." "Smart man," Claire said. "He was," Haley said. "He was also a mess, honestly, but he was smart about certain things." She looked at the lake. "Do you think this can actually happen? The thing Vincent's been building toward? The getting out?" "I think it's possible," Claire said. "I think possible and easy aren't the same thing." "He's different with you here," Haley said. "He's still himself," Claire said. "He's still going to do things that are hard and make choices I disagree with and have 30 years of habits that weren't built for the kind of life he's trying to move toward." She paused. "But yes, something's different." "What?" Claire thought about it. About the specific quality of a man who had spent decades being the most controlled person in any room, beginning, slowly and not without difficulty, to allow the room to contain something other than control. "He's less alone," she said. "That's the whole thing, really. Everything else follows from that." Spring moved into the city properly by April. The lake changed color from the January dark to something greener and more restless. Claire started taking a particular walk in the evenings when the caseload allowed it, along the bluff path, 40 minutes, enough to let the day settle before she came back to the house. Sometimes Haley joined her. Sometimes she went alone. One April evening, Vincent was waiting at the bend in the path when she came around it. She stopped. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face doing the quietly unguarded thing, and he'd clearly walked out from the house without a particular plan, which was unusual enough to be notable. "You're on my walk," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll join you if that's acceptable." "It's acceptable," she said. They walked the rest of the path together. The lake was doing its restless April thing beside them. The city was visible in the middle distance, lit and enormous and indifferent in the specific way that made it beautiful rather than hostile at this distance and this hour. They didn't talk for most of it. That was another thing she'd collected without announcing, the specific quality of their silence, the way it had moved over months, from the careful silence of two people being deliberate with each other to something that didn't require management, that sat naturally in the space between them without either of them having to maintain it. At the far end of this path, where the bluff came closest to the water and you could see the lights coming on across the lake, he stopped. She stopped beside him. "Brennan Hawthorne called this morning," he said. "I know, Reyes told me." She looked at the water. "What did he want?" "A meeting, formal, with documentation." He paused. "He wants to verify the April agreement with his father. He's coming around to the understanding that his father knew things he doesn't, and that the gaps in that knowledge are his problem rather than mine." "He's becoming manageable," she said. "He's beginning to," Vincent said, "slowly." "That's all we need," she said, "slow and forward." He looked at her. The lights from the city were behind him and his face was partly in shadow, and she could see the things in it that were permanent now. The lines of a man who had lived hard and thought hard and was doing something that looked like, against all the odds of his particular history, genuinely trying. "I've been thinking about the timeline some," he said. "The exit structure, the legitimization sequence." He paused. 3 years. Possibly 4. If things move the way I believe they can move. "Okay," she said. "That's a long time," he said. "A lot can happen." "A lot can happen in any 3 years," she said. "That's not a reason." "No," he said. "I know. 4 years ago I was a social worker in Wicker Park with a lamp I'd been saving up for, and an engagement I was quietly outgrowing," she said. "Life is not predictable. The only question is whether you keep moving toward the thing. He looked at her for a long moment. "You keep the lamp," he said. "It's on my nightstand," she said. "It's staying there." "Good," he said. She took his hand, not because the moment required it, not because anything required it, because she was choosing to, which was the only reason that had ever mattered, and which had been the whole point from the moment she'd picked up a card in a lobby and made the quiet decision to stop managing her life from behind glass. His hand closed around hers. They stood at the edge of the bluff and looked at the water while Chicago burned gold and cold and enormous in the distance, and the lake carried the light of it in pieces across its surface. And the evening came in fully, and neither of them moved to go inside yet. There was no clean conclusion. There was no moment where everything was resolved and the weight of it disappeared. Vincent was still Vincent, still capable of decisions that cost other people things, still carrying 30 years of an empire that didn't dismantle itself because he'd decided he wanted something different. Claire was still Claire, still collecting the grief of her sister's choices, still processing the specific quiet devastation of what Evan had been, still finding, in the daily work of her cases, the women whose lives reminded her why the work existed in the first place. But the woman who had walked into that penthouse bedroom in November believed that betrayal had ended something. She understood now that it had only ended the part that was always going to end. The part that came after. The part that was actually hers. She had built herself. One decision at a time. A card on a ledge. A restaurant on West Randolph. A lamp on a nightstand. A gate in the cold and the sound of frozen footsteps following her through it. Vincent didn't rescue her. Nobody rescued her. She had walked through every door herself, with her eyes open, knowing what was on the other side and choosing it anyway. That was the whole story. Everything else was just what happened next.